anyone who is here, I'd like to introduce Kelly Hall. We're presenting a forms for special education. She's a Google certified trainer, and if you'd hold your questions or enter them on the bottom of your screen, we'll address them afterwards. I'm Josie Grammer. You can send me email at josie.grammer@gmail.com. Also, our presenter, kelly.hall@gmail.com. Kelly?
Thanks, Josie. I'm real glad to have all of you guys here with us today. We're going to be talking about Google Forms. You know, as special educators, we don't have time. We never have enough time on our hands. Time to instruct our students, time to collaborate with other partners, teaching partners, time to work with our para-educators, time to work with parents. Just never seem to have enough time on our hands. And I know as a special educator, I struggled with that for years. And always kept trying to figure out how can I get some more efficient ways to handle all the paperwork that is a requirement of special education. And especially when it comes to individual education plan goals, we need to collect that data to determine eligibility for special education. We need to write an IEP or an individual education plan for that student, and then we need to be monitoring ongoing progress for the student, that we can be able to report that to the parents and determine if changes need to be made, or yay, students are making progress. Well, again, I struggled with that for years, and then I stumbled across an amazing tool that I want to share with you today, and that is Google Forms. So if you had a form that allowed you to collect some data very easily, and all of that data then went into a single spreadsheet with a date and time stamp of every entry, and then that spreadsheet you were able to then very easily create a graph that automatically updated with all of that information every time somebody submitted that form, don't you think you'd want to use that tool? And I can tell you right now, that tool is going to save you an immense amount of time and provide you with some amazing information you can use to inform your instruction with your students. So that tool that we're going to talk about today is Google Forms. It's going to enable you to create a form, automatically save all the information and the data that comes into that form into Google Sheets, and then easily create a graph that automatically updates with that information on an ongoing basis. It's going to save you time. Now, Google Forms is one of the applications that's available in Google Drive. So you need to have a Google account. So if you are a teacher who's part of a school or a district with a Google Apps for Education account, you automatically have access to Google Forms. If you don't, then you can still access Google Forms by creating a public Google Drive account, and then you would still have access to Google Forms. Now, there are a lot of uses for Google Forms, many, many more than we could cover here today. So we're only going to be focusing on individual education plan or IEP goals and how to collect data and manage the data for those. Now, some of you may be joining us from other countries. You might not have an IEP. You may have some other type of learning plan for your special education students. Nonetheless, I'm sure that you're in a position where you need to be collecting and monitoring that data in regards to student progress. So that's great that you're joining us. Now, I also can't show you the step-by-step process today of how to use Google Forms. We just don't have enough time for that. It is very easy to use, and there's a lot of resources on the web that will take you through the process, the step-by-step process of how to use Google Forms. So I'd encourage you to access those various resources. Finally, I want to indicate that too, that anyone can respond to a Google form. Only the individual creating the form needs to have the Google account in order to create that form and send it out for the users or respondents. Anyone can respond to the form. Students, your partner teachers, parents, they don't have to have a Google account in order to respond or use the form. Okay? Before we jump into looking at the tips and the useful ways that you're going to be able to use Google Forms for your IEP data, I have Josie share with you where you can access a lot of the other resources that I'm going to share as part of this session. Josie, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. So Josie has up on her screen the resource document, and you're also going to be able to access that document via the link on the Education on Air website as well. Thanks. So let's look at a particular form right off the bat here, looking at how you can use Google Forms for your IEP data. Before we look at a specific form, I want to talk about file management, because as you gain some experience in using forms, you're going to realize what an amazing tool it is. You're going to want to use it for all of your students. So you could very quickly end up with a lot of forms in your drive. So a couple of tips here right off the bat is to consider creating a folder for each of your students. That way you can collect all of the various IEP data in the folder that's specific to that student. Here again, I've just used the initials for the student, but because it's your own drive and you have probably minimal security concerns, especially if you're a Google Apps for Education district, it would be okay to use a student name on your folder names. Additionally, you might want to think about creating folders for each of the individual IEP goal areas. These would host your generic forms that you've created so that, especially if you're able to collaborate with other teachers in creating a variety of IEP forms, you can keep those here in your folder, share those folders out, and then when you need to use a specific form for a student, copy that form into the student's individual folder. So think about file management even before you begin the process of using Google Forms. So let's jump into looking at a specific form for collecting IEP goal data. Here I've just created a simple form for words read per minute. I've included the prompt that the student would read blank words a minute, and then some instructions on just entering the number of words read per minute as a numeral. This particular form uses a text box because we're just going to enter the number. I've also used the advanced settings to state that it has to be a number. That way, for the consistency of the data. This is an example, and a tip here is that it's important to only use a couple of goals per IEP form or goal data form. In this scenario, I only have reading fluency. I could also include reading comprehension here as well, because it's just focusing on reading. It's not a good idea to load up your form with every IEP goal that your student might be have on their IEP or their education learning plan, because it's going to make it very difficult for your users to answer every single one of those questions all of the time. So if you focus your forms on specific areas, it helps in management. There's a lot of different question types that are available in forms. You can see we were just using the text form, and it's just a simple text box. There's also paragraph. Additionally, you have multiple choice, choose from a list, the check boxes, a scale, a grid, and a date. Other than the text and paragraph boxes, the rest of these only require you to a single click, 1 or 2 clicks at the most, and hit submit, and that form is completed. So it's very easy for individuals, including students, to be able to use. So here's the live version of our form. Again, you can see I've just had student initials here. I've actually included the goal that the student is working on, so that whether it's the student using the form, a paraeducator, a general ed teacher, they're able to easily see what is it the goal is for this student. I just need to record the date, enter the words read per minute, hit submit, and I'm done. All of the data for words read per minute would be collected there. Moving on, looking at a math goal. Again, I've included the actual goal for the student. I'm just collecting the date, because this is going to help when we go to create a graph of this data. I want a simple percentage, just a number of the 2-digit addition subtraction problems. And then I've also included a comment field so that whether it's the paraeducator, general ed teacher, if they're noticing something particular in regards to how that student performed that day, they would be able to add some additional comments. This is also an example of only using student initials on the forms. It's a good idea to think about confidentiality, maintaining confidentiality for students. So I've only used the student initials. If you have some other way, other identifiers for students, that might be a useful tool. This is particularly helpful when general educators may be using a bookmark or a shortcut on a desktop in a larger, larger classroom in order, again, to maintain confidentiality for students. Another math example I have here is oral number identification fluency. And hopefully, as we're kind of briefly looking at a variety of forms here, you can start to get some ideas of the ways in which you could orient these forms for use in a variety of IEP goals. This particular form, we're identifying individual numbers based on a flashcard for that student. The respondent is just going to be answering yes or no to each of these questions, and it's going to ultimately produce a percentage of correct answers. This example of a writing IEP goal uses what's known as the grid or a rubric format type. Rubrics are very, very useful, very powerful. I'm sure many of you use them on a frequent basis. And again, I can indicate the specific criteria on the rubric. I've indicated a prompt here in terms of a 1 means below basic, all the way up to a 5 being excellent, and I need the date. Again, this is going to produce a numeral, an average for this student of their performance, and going to be very easy for us to track how well the student is doing. This is another example of a rubric that I created. This one's a little different because I had a PDF of a writing rubric that I really liked because of the criteria being very clear for individuals to use. So I used a screen sharing app. Either Awesome Screenshot would be one option, or Lightshot, which is my personal favorite. I simply took screenshots of the rubric, and then I annotated over the top with the numbers, the scoring numbers, and then I just dropped the image right into the Google form, and I'm using the scale question type to indicate the scoring. This is a very useful type of rubric because the criteria is very clear. So again, whether a paraeducator, general ed teacher, even a student would be able to evaluate their work and then score it. This also could be very useful when it comes to behavior goals. If you have behavior or social skills goals, and maybe you have some great rubrics that you're using to evaluate student progress, either use a PDF, cut and paste those images in, or use the grid format to create those questions. And here's an example of that. This is a model student rubric that we've created. Again, you just need to indicate the date. This is also an example of using a checkbox or the drop down to have the individual indicate what their name is as well as the class that they're teaching. This is a much easier way for the individual to indicate their name or their class rather than having them type it in. It will take less time for them to type versus just simply choosing the drop down. So you want to think about that. But again, this is the grid and a behavior goal that we're tracking here. 1 indicating seldom, 5 indicating always, going to result in a number that we're going to be able to use to evaluate student progress. So looked at those various form types, and again, I want to emphasize it's really important to think about your users. There's a lot of research that goes into creating surveys, I'm sure you're aware, and you have to think about those things as you're creating your Google Forms for your users. How can I make it easy for them to respond to this form? Whether it's a student, general education teacher, or parent, the fewer amount of clicks that they need to make on that form, the more likely they're going to be responding to it and willing to keep responding to those forms. Another tip would be as you get more proficient in using forms and realize, hey, this is amazing, because you are. I'm telling you right now, you are going to love using forms for IEP goal data. It's going to be important to collaborate within your buildings. Especially if you have other special education teachers, they're going to see that you're using this amazing tool. They're going to want to do it, and pretty soon you're going to have lots and lots of students' IEP goal data that you're trying to collect using Google Forms. It's going to be really important that you collaborate within your buildings with your general education teachers, so that you're not overwhelming them with a request to complete a lot of Google Forms on a lot of students daily, weekly, and so forth. So collaborate together. It's going to be really important to do that. So we've looked at the variety of forms that are available, and I hope, again, that you're already starting to wrestle with some ideas of ways that you can use those forms to collect various IEP goal data for your students. Now let's jump into looking at how you can analyze and chart that data once it starts flowing in. So we're going to jump to looking at the sheet. So I have that words read per minute data that's been coming into my Google Sheet here. And again, Forms automatically date and timestamps the data as it comes in. I've also included the date range because sometimes those dates don't coincide. The date of the probe may have been different than the date that I actually entered the data in, especially if I'm using sticky notes or some other way to collect this information. And then I have just the words read per minute. You notice on this particular form at the bottom there's 3 tabs here because I have changed the destination, the response destination on the IEP goal forms for math, words read per minute, and the model student rubric, so that they all come into one separate sheet here for this particular student. That way I can keep all of this data in one location for my students. I have shared the process to how you can do that on your forms in the resources that I've shared with you. So let's look at how easy it's going to be to create a simple chart of this data. So I'm going to just simply come up here to insert. Oops, I'm just trying to get that bigger there. There we go. I'm going to come here to insert, come down to chart. And I need to select the date range, so I'm clicking there. I'm going to move this over so you can see. I'm going to choose the column title and the data that I need to include in my chart, and I simply click OK. And already Charts has started collecting that information, and it's given me some examples of ways that I can use my data. I'd like to use this line chart, and that's all it took was one simple click, and I already have my data graphed. I have the dates of the probes at the bottom and the actual data. And now I can come here to customize and actually make some changes so that my chart is very clear for anybody to read. Change the title here. I'm going to slide down. I like to have the points on the chart very prominent, easy for people to read. And I'm also going to then add a trend line. You can change the color of the trend line, so again, it's very noticeable. So I think that's been about 6 clicks is all that it's taken to create this simple chart. I'm going to actually change this to dates of probes. I'm going to click insert, and now I have my chart of my data. I'm going to just slide this over. And every time a user submits the form now, from this point forward, this chart's going to automatically update with every form submission. That is amazing. To me, that is a mind-blowing tool. I can then now actually take this chart, and in our school district, we have electronic IEP software. I think that's a common thing across the nation now for most districts to be using web-based or online IEP software. We can actually take this chart and cut and paste it directly into our IEP software. It won't automatically update once it's been cut and paste, but at progress report time on an annual basis, that chart will, I'll be able to cut and paste that directly into my reports. So that's a very simple data This data we didn't need to do anything with it. It was just the entries for words read per minute. I didn't need to add it or average it. So what do you need to do? What can you do to the data if you needed to perform a formula? Because unfortunately, Sheets, if you needed to apply a formula to this data, such as an average, if you were using a rubric, every form submission, that formula is not going to automatically update. Well, there's an answer for that, and that answer is copy down. So here's the data that have been collected from the model student rubric. We have the date and timestamp, the date the data was recorded, the class, the teacher, and then I have the rubric data that's come in. Well, the goal was set based on an average, so I need an average for each form submission. I'm going to use the formula option and create an average. Enter, and now I have an average of the rubric data. As I indicated, unfortunately, Sheets will not automatically apply this formula each time a form is submitted. So if I want to create a graph based on this average, I need to use an add-on, and that add-on is called Copy Down. So you can see right there at the top of your screen, Copy Down. And I'm just going to enable Copy Down. And you can find, again, in your resource document, I've shared with you a number of ways that you can install the add-on and the link to the Cloud Labs that have created Copy Down. So now I can just turn on Copy Down there as it's indicated there on the right. And it's actually looking for the formula that I applied to row 2. You can do it as to row 2 or row 3. And it's now discovered the formula, and from this point on, every time a form is submitted, it's going to automatically update that data. Let's see. Let's see if we can try this really quick. I'm going to go to the live form. This is what the live form looks like on that model student rubric. Let's just randomly choose a date here. Choose a reading class. Mr. Jones, and our student did a pretty good job today. And hopefully you're noticing how easy it is to fill out this form. I click submit, and that's the response I get back. Go back to my model student rubric, and there you go. It just copied down every one of those formulas to each line, and it was that simple. Now I can go in, and just as we showed you in the previous example, I can simply create a chart. I need to select my date, my ranges. In this particular case, I'm going to choose these dates. And, oops, sorry, need to do that again. I need to add another range because I need my actual averages. And choose my line chart. Oh, I kind of have incorrect date there, but you can see, again, very easy using that chart function to create the chart of those averages. So we have looked at the ways that Google Form can be saving you an immense amount of time. Create those forms to collect those IEP goal data, send those forms out, data is going to start flowing in. You can simply create some great charts that are going to automatically update every time somebody continues to submit your form, and use those as a ways to inform your instruction. Now, how can you share those out? What are some efficient ways that you can share out the Google Forms so that you can be collecting this information from your students and general education teachers? Well, there's a number of different ways. One of them, you can keep using the stickies. You can keep using the paper, and especially if your paraeducators or general ed teachers are used to using that, keep doing it. But at the end of the day or periodically through the week, take this information and transfer it right into your Google form. It's still going to save you a lot of time in collecting that information, collating it, creating that chart, and having it automatically updated. If you've got teachers who are not comfortable in using Google Forms or using computer technology, maybe you don't have a lot of technology in your buildings, You can also print off the form, right there. You can print off the form, and you can see it actually prints just exactly as it would almost look like on the Google form. Individuals can easily fill that out, hand it into you, and again, at the end of the day or periodically through the week, you can record that data. It's still going to save you a lot of time. If your district is a one-on-one district or a bring your own device district, if you have iPads, Chromebooks, Android tablets, you have easy access to using forms each and every day. You can create a shortcut or a bookmark so that it's very easy for students to come in, choose their name, record their data, hit submit, and they're done. There's all that data flowing into your charts. I have been able to purchase very inexpensive Android tablets, especially those little 7-inch Android tablets. You can find them on the web in various stores. Don't want to plug any particular store, but one of the ones that starts with an A. Anyway, very inexpensive, $40, $50, and I tell you, paraeducators love them because it's very easy to take those around to various classes. The students' IEP goal data, they're bookmarked right on there. Again, with a few simple clicks, that data is recorded, sent off into your spreadsheet. Finally, you might want to think about using used smartphones. Yep, used smartphones. Collect those, have students, parents donate them, take the SIM card out of that used smartphone. As long as it has Wi-Fi access, you now have a tool that you can, again, install a bookmark or a shortcut to your Google form. Very quickly, an individual can record the data, click submit, and it's going to head off. Now, again, I have to ask you, do you want more time? Do you need more time in your day so that you can actually be instructing your students? I mean, that's why we got into the field, right? Well, Google Tools and this Google form specifically is going to give you that time. So we have some time here at the end that I can open up for questions. Do we have any, Josie?
No questions so far.
No
but
question.
I wanted to direct you, if you do have questions, direct all of them to kelly.hall@gmail.com. You can also send them to me, josie.grammer.
There's kelly.hall@boiseschools.org.
Schools.org. And we'll get those directed and answered.
Okay. Any other comments? Again, we got a couple of minutes left here at the end. I do want to encourage you to also really to think about using these Google Forms and having your students be the ones either creating their own Google Forms to collect their IEP goal data. That is a very powerful thing. When students recognize what their goals are, create the data form to collect their IEP goal data, and can be recording their own data. That's powerful. They can personalize those forms with images. You can change the top of the Google form so that you can change the images on the header, and that's a very easy way to personalize that for students. Show you right there, that top of that form can be very easily to be personalized. It would also be a way to identify particular forms that particular students might be using. So for example, if I have a student who likes cats, then maybe that student's forms all have a cat on them. Again, very easy to recognize, oh, that belongs to that student. So just easy ways, tips to get students more involved in their IEPs, personalize that. So I really appreciate all of you joining us at our session today, and take advantage of the resources as well as all of the other great Education on Air sessions throughout the rest of today. So I'll hang out here for a little bit. If